Everybody, welcome into Cover 4 Live. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have all of you with us as we talk about everything going on around UGA football for the next few minutes, and we'll invite your comments on both Facebook and YouTube as well. The topic that we'll get into today are some of the knowns, things we're pretty sure about regarding Georgia, some of the unknowns, things that we're not quite so sure that are going to play out with the Bulldogs this year. We'll debate all of that. And I guess it's probably fair to say that we wanted to make sure we got together and did this one here today because Mike, starting next week, you're going to have some Dog Nation folks on vacation for a few weeks. So this is one of the last times until really the start of practices that will all be in the same place at the same time. So probably important for us all to get together and do a little talking here this week. Man, we're off to a rip-roaring start.
Is that me? Yeah.
Hey,
let's
you're
get
the
it
only one
going.
here named Mike.
I missed the mic key. Connor,
No
looking
worries.
good today.
You are looking
good.
nice.
He really is.
Jeff's got his Olin Mills Studios of backdrop there. He's looking nice there as well. And that's the only free advertisement I'll give on the thing today. But that reminds me of growing up and having to get the pictures at Olin Mills there.
We're off to a great start here.
No, I'm faking you out.
All right, there you go. Very, very good stuff. Well, we're going to have a good time. We'll take your comments. And, of course, glad to have all of you with us. Let me begin with this. And, Mike, I will start with you on this. So when we were talking about the knowns, the unknowns, honestly, some of these we may not even have time to get to because there are a few key questions that almost too many to fit into one broadcast. Some of this will probably overlap into a future week. But let me start with this. At the quarterback spot, we've obviously talked a lot about Jamie Newman. And sometimes when I bring him up on Dog Nation Daily, I'm forced to say that for a moment, I'm going to pretend that JT Daniels doesn't exist because one of the largest unknowns that faces Georgia this upcoming season is what happens if Daniels is eligible, and there's a degree to which you're forced to speculate on something like that. So for these next few minutes, let's don't pretend as if JT Daniels doesn't exist. Let's take this topic head on. Big unknown here. NCAA grants the waiver for JT Daniels. He's eligible for the upcoming season. What do you think happens then?
There's competition every week. I think it's options. It's different availabilities for Georgia. Certainly we're aware that COVID-19 can strike at any time. Certainly one quarterback, maybe more than just an insurance policy. I've said from the start, I think Georgia's going to play two quarterbacks in the month of September, BA.
So the last part of that's pretty interesting. The first part of that, it almost seems like you're auditioning for a coach speak convention. Obviously, we know there's competition. We know stuff like that. But in the case of Daniels in particular, do you think he would overtake Jamie Newman? Is that your best guess?
I don't know. There's a potential for it. It depends on what the supporting cast looks like and how equipped these receivers are. I mean, there's so many other factors. How good is the offensive line protection? Seems to me if you don't have a very good offensive line, having a mobile quarterback would help. Or if they're better run blockers than they are pass blockers, maybe you want to run more RPOs. You also have to factor into it that Jamie Newman missed a game with a shoulder injury last year. Sometimes these guys get bumps and bruises, and if you've got more than one capable quarterback, why not play him?
Connor, what do you think?
Well, one, I would just like to point out that Mike continues to hex and curse this Georgia quarterback position. So when things go wrong this year,
Mike has a lot of injury predictions. I agree with Connor.
I just wanted people to remember these broadcasts and said this is where it all started to go wrong. But I think
thanks.
in the college football playoff era, you look at the teams that have won championships. Ohio State in 2014 started 3 different quarterbacks. Alabama in 2015 started 2 quarterbacks. Alabama again in 2017, Tua didn't start, but Tua played a big role, especially obviously in the second half of that championship game. And you even look at 2018, that Clemson team, Trevor Lawrence only started the final, 10 or 11 games of the season. Yeah, they went with Kelly Bryant to open the season. I think you've seen in the past teams can, whether it be because of injury or inadequate play, sort of adjust quarterbacks over the course of the season and sort of make a change that gives them a better chance to win. Unfortunately, I think with Georgia's schedule and playing Alabama week 3, with that being such a pivotal game for them, I think in the course of the way the season sets up and the narrative around it, they might not get that sort of luxury to make a change over the season where they're still winning a lot and still have a lot on the table where they're trying to maximize their ceiling. Whereas if they drop that week 3 game against Alabama, a change might come because maybe it seems like a panic move or because whoever that week 1 starter is and it just doesn't get done. But with Daniels coming in, and my sort of thought with him in general is we can't just hand Jamie Newman the keys because he got here 3 months early. And I think specifically with Georgia and Kirby Smart, with the whole Jake Fromm, Justin Fields thing, I think a lot of the quarterback decision-making in terms of who was playing was based off what had been done in the past and not necessarily what's best for the future of the program. And that can't happen this season. And that is, I think, something to watch. And we shouldn't just give Newman or whoever the quarterback is the job based off what they've done in the however many months they've been here. They need to go ahead and pick and play the guy who gives them the best chance to win both this season and going forward. If that's Daniels, he needs to be the guy.
Jeff, what do you think?
All right, guys, here's the part where I step out of this Olin Mills photography portrait and into the briar patch. Let me inject some true serum Mike Griffith style brand into my veins. Here's what I actually think, guys. I think, one, it doesn't matter who wins the quarterback position right now, because I think the guy that's going to come out is going to be the best quarterback for Georgia. Here comes the hot take zone. One, I think, as Connor alluded to, this is a chance for Georgia fans to answer the debate. What if Justin Fields and what if Jake Fromm came into the Georgia program at the same time without a body of work, a body of reps, plays made, emotional, invested leadership capital that was already stockpiled? You don't have any of this with either of these guys. There's no attachment. There's no game plans. There's no strategy. There's no practice rep wins. I'm going to make the argument, folks, and I kind of said it yesterday on Before the Hedges. Let's look at this. Career starts in college football for Jamie Newman. There's 16. Career starts for JT Daniels in college football. There's 12. There's not a lot of difference between these guys. These are different types of quarterbacks, no doubt, but they're also both equally skilled quarterbacks. And I think if you put them both through a combine at any time of their careers, I think most or half of the NFL scouts would lean towards JT Daniels, because, folks, when he came out as a recruit, a lot of the industry has thought about this and said this. He would be the number one quarterback recruit just about any other year, except for the Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence year.
But, Jeff, if that's true, where are those people today? Because, the one thing that you can go back and chronicle over the last couple of months is, whether it be, I had Chip Patterson from CBS Sports on my show today, Dog Nation Daily. He's recently quoted a CBS Sports draft expert who thought that Newman would be a top 10 pick. Greg McElroy goes on an Atlanta radio station, recently said that he thought Newman would be a top 5 pick. David Pollack, who is not a noted Georgia homer, although he is a former Georgia great, goes on ESPN a couple of months ago, said he thought Jamie Newman would be a first-round pick. There's a lot of love for Newman, as I've said before, that predates his arrival at UGA. There's really not this, at least that I can tell, unless I'm not paying attention to the right sources here, but there's really not this groundswell of, oh my gosh, people who follow the quarterback situation around the country saying that JT Daniels is going to come to Georgia and he's going to replicate all those feats. Now, he's not draft eligible next year, so maybe that's part of that. But if if Daniels is just as beloved as Jamie Newman, then where's all the present tense love for Daniels? Because I'm not really seeing that.
Well, I think, Brandon, a lot of that has to do with the injury question. People want to know if JT Daniels is ready to go, if he's fully recovered. Reminder, he wouldn't have been able to participate as a full go in spring practice for Southern Cal. But, I mean, I'm going to say, Brandon, if Daniels has a great year, good year at Georgia, whether it's rotating or whether it's part-time, taking over for an injury at Georgia, he is eligible to go pro because his graduating class of high school will be 3 seasons outside of his first season in 2018. I just think with Daniels, it's funny, and I'm going to try and make Mike laugh as I say this, but I'm going to stereotype the recruiting reporter right here. The recruiting reporter feels like they know all the answers because they've seen the trailer, they've seen the test, they know how it's going to work in college football. While the beat writer thinks, I'm going to believe it when I see it. I don't know. College football is really hard. Let's see how it all plays out, and then that's what I'll do. I think with Daniels, though, when you go back to the body of work, Daniels threw for over 1,100 attempts in high school football. As a point of comparison, Justin Fields only had 400 attempts in high school football. This guy is ready to play. He's ready to go. Whenever he comes out, he's going to have a first-round draft grade. And for Georgia and a lot of these fans, it's kind of going to be let the best man win, because I'm going to say right here, Briar Patch time, that I think the differences between Daniels, a fully healthy Daniels, and Jamie Newman are not that vast at all.
Mike, what do you think? Go ahead, Connor.
I think the difference between Daniels and Newman, it strictly comes from the programs that they were previously at. Daniels was at a big-time program, and he did not exactly live up to the hype in that sense. And I think there's the willingness to not necessarily give that out a second time around, even though I think all of us agree here that the problems with USC in 2018 were not just limited to JT Daniels,
right,
a guy who should have been a high school senior struggling in his first year at college football. Whereas Jamie Newman comes from Wake Forest. It is not a program that gets a lot of attention. He did some cool stuff early in the season last year, but if you go and look at his November numbers, and yes, there are obviously a bunch of different factors in there, but he was not good from the month of November on, and that was a real problem. And quite frankly, if Newman was the guy that we all thought he was and thought he would be, don't you think he would still be at Wake Forest? Because you look at some of these recent NFL draft quarterbacks, Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, guys who did not play at superstar winning programs, but found a way to get drafted high in the NFL draft. The NFL nowadays, if you're a talented quarterback, they will find you. Trey Lance has already been talked about as a top 15 pick in next year's draft, and he's a quarterback in North Dakota State who I guarantee you no one here has seen play an actual snap. So these guys can find you, and I have sort of been at maybe the forefront of, hey, let's slow things down on Jamie Newman a little bit here. And I think the reason that Newman is getting the hype that Daniels isn't is Newman is going from, a small pond to a bigger pond. And he did really well at times in that small pond, and it'll be potentially fun to see how he does in the big pond. Whereas we already sort of saw JT Daniels in a big pond program at USC, and that didn't necessarily go how everyone thought it would.
Mike, I want you to respond to this, but let me jump in on something that Connor just said. I think it's a bad comparison with Carson Wentz because while that's a smaller school, he was also thriving in that offense. There was no reason for him to leave. He was doing great. For the most part, almost anyone you get at the graduate transfer level or just the transfer level in general, they're going to be damaged goods in some way or another. KJ Costello, I think, is a very good quarterback at Mississippi State. He leaves Stanford because he was uncertain about what his situation was there after dealing with an injury and things like that. You're always going to be buying low a little bit when it comes to a graduate transfer. If things were going great for Newman at Wake Forest, he would have no reason to leave because even if you're not winning a national championship there, as you said, it is a plenty good springboard to get to the NFL draft. There are guys that are going to be drafted off this year's Wake Forest team, a name off offense and a name off defense probably. So it's not a place you can't get drafted off of, but clearly Newman felt like it wasn't serving him as well as it could. It's not that different from Lawrence Cager a year ago or Trey McKitty as a tight end for this year there as well. Graduate transfers who leave one place to come to another are usually leaving that school for a reason. In Newman's case, he wasn't being developed and maybe utilized as well as he could have been at Wake Forest. No guarantee that works out at Georgia, but that's the reason why he's on the transfer market to begin with, I would say.
Yeah, and he's going to get a chance to play in more of a pro-style offense with Todd Monken, a guy that's coached in the NFL, and that serves his purpose, although I still think he's going to run the ball and be effective with the RPOs. And I think Daniels, as you guys have talked about, he could have another year. If things work out and he plays enough this year, he could be gone after this year. He's draft eligible. But, again, I think it comes down to how does the team move with this guy under center? As much as it's one-on-one, it certainly isn't a matter of who runs the best 40 or throws the ball and hits the most targets. It's who moves the football team, who wins the locker room. And that's going to play out over the fall. And I think the offense would look different and will look different with both of these guys under center at different points this year.
Let me make one final point on this, Jeff, and we're going to talk about George Pickens after this. I want to go back to something that you said a moment ago. I think it's incorrect to say this is a little bit like Fromm versus Fields from 2018, because in that particular case, I don't think that Georgia was choosing between classic drop back quarterback versus running quarterback, decided it wanted the classic guy more so than the more athletic running quarterback, nor do I think that's where this plays out with Newman and Daniels. I think that Georgia simply made, in this case, we'll call this Kirby Smart's choice. I think Georgia simply made the wrong choice. It didn't choose Fromm because it wanted a classic quarterback. I think the coaches in place at the time thought that Fromm was the better quarterback. As history has shown, that was probably a decision made in error. But it's the same thing here between Newman and Daniels. To me, this is not which flavor of quarterback do you want, a guy that runs more or a guy that has the look of a classic drop back more. It's simply between Newman and Daniels, who's going to be the better of the two quarterbacks, however they choose to use the skill set that God has given.
Yeah, Brian, the way I look at that, and I get to agree with you on the point that I don't think it is pro-style pocket passer, cement shoes type guy in the pocket. But if you look at a lot of Newman's film at Wake Forest, he's a guy that steadfastly wants to stay in the pocket. He wasn't an extend or escape guy. I don't think it's a difference in Fromm and Fields in terms of style A versus style B. I think it's just two tremendously talented quarterbacks. Nobody has an edge in terms of playing experience or coaching staff trust equity on the other. I think it's an example of who runs the team the best, and that means who functions the best and brings out the best of Todd Monken's offense and what he wants to do, whether that's RPO game, whether that's throwing the ball downfield and stretching the field. I think that's the example of two guys where one guy doesn't have a head start in terms of, I'm going to say it again, coaching staff trust equity. I think that the two questions I'd love people to answer on our feeds with all you smart guys here is if JT Daniels didn't have sort of a reason why he thought he would be eligible or not eligible, why doesn't he stay at Southern Cal? He would be immediately eligible there. There could be an injury to the starter, much like what happened to him. And then two, I think it speaks to the greater point, what everybody was making about Newman is, if Jamie Newman was all who he thought was going to be, shouldn't he be in the NFL right now? That's my question.
You guys have thoughts on that, Connor and Mike?
So I'll speak to the USC point on Daniels. The reason he's not there is because Keaton Slovis is the truth. I think that guy is right now one of the 10 best quarterbacks in college football, maybe even a top 5. I get that he missed time with injury last year, but if you're a guy that's just hoping for an injury to happen in front of you, that's just a really crummy position to be in. And, I believe JT Daniels is good enough and thinks he's good enough to go out and win a starting job at X number of schools in college football. And based on his pedigree, and he comes again, Jeff mentions his high school stats. He's doing that at one of the best high school football programs in Mater Dei, Santa Ana, down there in California, in the entire country. So I understand, him saying, hey, this Keaton Slovis guy is really good. I'm going to try my luck elsewhere. And we've seen that work. It happened with Joe Burrow. Ohio State chose Dwayne Haskins. Dwayne Haskins goes on to be a first-round quarterback. Joe Burrow goes to LSU, has a great career there. Just, and so I think, with Daniels there, I certainly understand him sort of seeing Slovis. And sure, you might like a competitor to maybe stick that out, try and win the job more. But when you have limited time like these guys do, limited windows to try and maximize your NFL potential, you have to sort of take advantage of it when you can.
Mike, let me give you the last word by responding to this comment from Mitch Monteith on YouTube, who says, I love this, quote, problem, if you want to call it that. I agree with Mitch on this, Mike. It is an unknown for Georgia, but not an unknown in that it's a problem because the presence of JT Daniels, who I do think is an incredibly talented player, and I would have loved to have seen working in the Graham Harrell offense in LA a year ago. This is not a problem for Georgia to have a lot of depth quarterback position. We just don't know how it's going to sort itself out yet.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you, BA. And, as for Keaton Slovis, he's an incredibly talented guy, but he's got a history of concussions already. I've got to think that Daniels likes the supporting cast. Who knows what the politics were. He went out with a knee injury after one half of football. I don't know what he was told as far as the opportunity to win the position. There was a lot of thought that, he stays this year, plays, and then he can be a grad transfer and go somewhere without a waiver. So obviously there was something about Georgia that drew him here, perhaps a chance to win a national championship. I look at the receiver room, but I also think Todd Monken. I think Todd Monken drew him in. And my thought on this quarterback position is it starts out slow because you can only do as much as those perimeter receivers can learn. But as the season progresses, you get a little bit more complicated and a little more complex, maybe a little bit pass the ball a little bit more, and maybe JT Daniels overtakes Jamie Newman by the end of the year. Or, as we talked about earlier, this is a rough league, and as Connor pointed out, there have been guys that have been injured at other schools and other quarterbacks have stepped in.
All right, so that's one of the unknowns facing Georgia for this season. Let's move on and talk about one of the knowns for the upcoming year. You're watching the Cover 4 Live. My name's Brandon Adams. Happy to have Jeff Sentell, Mike Griffith, Connor Riley with us here as we talk about everything related to UGA. And we'll stay on the offensive side of the ball for a moment. Whoever the Georgia quarterback ends up being, one of the guys presumably he'll be throwing to a lot is George Pickens. Connor, I don't know that there's any more known commodity on the Georgia roster, offensively speaking, more so than Pickens. Admittedly, he missed some time near the end of the season for reasons that have been well chronicled by now. But in terms of Pickens, that's the one guy you at least have an idea what to expect from. But my question would be is, how do you make sure you get the most out of George Pickens this year?
Right. Well, first I'd point out that Mike Griffith has hexed Pickens already by writing him out of the spring game with an injury. So, if that happens at some point this year, we know who to look for there. Again, honestly, I think Pickens, with what Todd Monken in the past, especially at the NFL level with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, what he has done with the downfield vertical passing game with guys like Mike Evans at the college level, with a player like Justin Blackman, guys who I think Pickens, at least in their leagues, I'm not saying Pickens is Mike Evans right now, but certainly, what Evans is in the NFL, I think Pickens is at a college level. That skill set, his ability to just go up and get any ball, I think with a vertical passing threat, with whoever the quarterback ends up being, I think we'll all probably agree Newman and Daniels probably have better long-term, long-range accuracy than Jake Fromm did. I just think he's a guy, BA, I think last year you talked about, can you get me 4 more 20-plus yard pass plays a game? Honestly, all 4 of those should and try and go to George Pickens every single game. If you can get, from Pickens 4 20-plus yard catches a game, I think that puts you in a great spot to both maximize what he can do and what this entire Georgia offense can do. Because if he's catching those type of bombs, that's going to open up everything both underneath and in the running game.
Jeff, what do you think?
Well, first with Pickens, I'd say that we talk about security of jobs. I think he's probably one of the only 3 guys that we know what's going to happen coming out of fall camp. I don't know if there's maybe Richard LeCount, Monty Rice. Are there any other positions on the team that you think that camp is what it is and competition what it is, but in terms of knowns, I don't know.
I might add Trey Hill to that list.
I would add Jordan Davis.
I would add Trey Hill maybe at a different position, though. That's one thing. I mean, he's got a lot of starts, but I think it's safe to say we're on agreement that there may be 5 names we can stretch it to that are like these guys are kind of penciled in as much as possible.
Yeah. Pickens would be one of mine. No, you're right. Yeah, Pickens would be one of mine.
Jake Camarda to the list also.
Mike, I thought you didn't care about the kicking game, man. Come on.
I'm piling on.
So with Pickens, I don't know if it's the 20-yard bombs. Maybe he's more of the intermediate 18 to 20-yard route, 15 to 17-yard route. A lot of the short stuff, because I think a lot of that stuff's going to be opened up with the new offense in terms of Pickens. I mean, Pickens is a guy that will benefit from some folks wondering we can't bracket him anymore. We got to put somebody over the top. Georgia needs to develop somebody else around him. And but it's funny though, when we go through all those 5 names, I don't know if you have 5 all-SEC, all-American candidates there. I think Pickens is an all-SEC, probably not an all-American, but if he's an all-American, if he's an all-SEC guy in the SEC, then that means he's an all-American. Because that means he's as good as Jalen Waddle. He's as good as Jamar Chase. He's as good as a lot of dudes that are very good at that position. I think Pickens is kind of going to be a known. I think if we would throw him down for 55 catches, 900 yards, 9 touchdowns, I think that's the baseline for George Pickens.
Hold on now. Be careful. I mean, listen, I love that stat line, but it's tough to throw 900 yards around as a baseline, just given the fact that, Jeff, you got Terrence Edwards in 2002. You're just not getting to that number very much. I mean, it's one thing to say he's clearly Georgia's best receiver and a welcome target for the quarterback, whoever it ends up being. It's another thing to start putting a statistical number around it, because I believe if I had to put my numbers next to George Pickens, as much as I love Pickens, as much as I need for Georgia to have that breakout receiver to win a national championship, I'm not going to flippantly write down a number that starts with a 9. I hope it's true, but I can't say with great certainty that's true.
Well, Brandon, you got to remember they play a lot more games this year. If for some instance George Pickens in Georgia play 13 or 14 games, that's only like 75 yards per game in terms of what's happening there. I'm going to look to parallels of what some lesser talented receivers have done in the Southern Miss offense, the Oklahoma State offense, and everything out throughout the years. And to me, I think the question at Georgia is not with Pickens, is he the number 1 and how many numbers he's going to get to. Maybe the baseline number is 750, 800 instead of 900. I get where you're going there. I figured you would raise more eyebrows to me about the 9 touchdown catches, because that's way up there as well. I think the bigger number is who's the number 2. Who's the number 2? Because the number 2, and if it's somebody tantalizing like Demetrius Robertson, or going another direction and it's Marcus Rosemy or even a Jermaine Burton, all of a sudden that means those guys are special, and that means defenses have a fear factor for those guys. And then you got to take a little less pressure away, a little less coverage and defense responsibility on George Pickens' side.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with what Jeff was saying about the key being who the number 2 is. And that was something that Terrence Edwards also talked about. Who's going to be the one to take advantage of that safety shading over to the side of George Pickens? Because everybody's going to go into a game with a Pickens plan. We talked with the LSU defensive coordinator last year. They had 3 defenses they didn't even call in the first half. They were waiting on George Pickens in the second half. And oh, by the way, George Pickens didn't play the first half because he was suspended. So part of this is going to have to do with how George manages himself, because as Terrence Edwards also said, this is a guy that's going to be targeted by opponents. He's going to be double teamed. They're going to try to lure him into fisticuffs and potential future suspensions. They're going to go high-low. They're really going to give George Pickens the business out there, knowing that he is Georgia's marquee receiver. And I would say, and agree with BA on, marquee skill position player. So I think a lot of this has to do with how the offense evolves, how much of it is east-west and efficient, proficient versus downfield, stretch the field. Also, how effective is the run game? A lot of this has to do with your down and distance situation. And these are things, we really haven't been able to dip our toe in because of the COVID-19 canceling spring drills.
So a couple things on that. We'll wrap this topic up. Connor, to go back to what Mike just said, I'm a much bigger believer that passing game opens for the run more so than run opens for the pass, because we've lived with the latter part of it at Georgia the last couple of years, and it just has not exploded the passing game like many of you Georgia fans hoped it would. But beyond that, a point that Jeff has made and a point that Mike has made, and I've on my show compared this to like a Jordan Pickens situation of, hey, can someone play off of Pickens, either on the other side of the field or running underneath him, whatever else? Can someone utilize the attention that Pickens is justifiably going to receive to go on to have a great season? And Pickens at his best, I think, makes someone else, if not great themselves, at least very, very good.
Right. You go back sort of, your Pippen Jordan thing, I think Kobe Bryant really blossomed with the Lakers because teams had to focus on double teaming Shaq all the time.
Sure they did. Yeah.
And so that eventually allowed Kobe to develop into the player that he ended up becoming. Conversely, as Griff and Sintel both pointed out, those are guys, there's going to be someone that's going to be relatively open. I think now the talent level in that wide receiver room, certainly by the end of the year, maybe even by the beginning, it's just going to be too good to not have a talented wide receiver who can sort of get open and find and create some separation. I'm a little disappointed, though, that neither of these guys mentioned the actual guy who's going to be the number 2 receiver for Georgia this year. That's Dominic Blaylock. I know he's got an ACL injury. This guy's been a fast healer before. This guy's a workout warrior. He does everything well. He's just a very, very sound, good football player, and I think that's what he's going to be for Georgia this year. And I think he's perhaps the player that benefits the most, more than a quarterback, more than a running back, that benefits from George Pickens and his upgraded profile, because I think it is going to allow him both either in a slot position where he'll probably get a majority of reps, or even on the outside in sort of those downfield shots that we saw him do against Auburn last year. I think he's someone that is greatly going to benefit from the attention that Pickens ends up getting.
Connor, real quick response to this. You selling any Blaylock stock coming off of an injury?
0.0% I will ever sell Dominic Blaylock stock.
Jeff, who's the number 2 receiver? Who's the number 2 receiver on this team?
Well, see, I love this question because if you want to say, game notes, depth chart, Virginia, the number 2 receiver is going to be somebody else. But when you get to Tuscaloosa and that's fateful September, I think the answer is going to be something else entirely. I would probably, if you, like my grandfather used to say, if you want to place a Coca-Cola on it instead of like wagering for gentlemen's purposes, I still think when the balance of the 2020 season is said and done, the number 2 most productive receiver on this football team is going to be Dominic Blaylock.
Mike, how about you? Number 2 receiver. If we stipulate Pickens is number 1, who's the number 2?
Start of the year, it'll be Demetrius Robertson. By the end of it, it'll be Jermaine Burton.
All right, fun stuff. By the way, on our Facebook comment section, Nick Talent, Christopher White both bring up interesting topics. Nick on the subject of the kicker, Christopher White on the subject of the offensive line. Those are 2 issues that I thought we would try to potentially get into today. We're not going to have time to do that as part of our official topics. But before we're done, Nick and Christopher, if you can stick with us for a few more minutes, we'll address briefly the kicker situation and the offensive line situation before we're done today to keep the show fully interactive here. On Cover 4 Live, Brandon Adams, of course, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, Connor Raleigh. We're stretched out all across the state of Georgia today, but glad to have all of you with us. And we'll continue to take your comments on both Facebook and YouTube as well. So unknown quarterbacks off the top. What happens with JT Daniels? Known commodity with George Pickens a moment ago. Let me move to an unknown commodity now as well. And Jeff Sintel, before our show started, I thought you had an interesting way of saying this. You said this is the – I hope I say it the way that you want me to, but the starter to be determined that you don't think people are talking enough about yet. Put it in your own words and tell me why you feel that way, and tell the folks the position that you're talking about.
Yeah. I think folks got to remember what this position has meant to Georgia football over the last 4 years, and especially maybe Kirby Smart's style of game plan and game plan management. Everybody remembers the kicks he didn't take against South Carolina. Everybody remembers the kick that needed to be made in the first half against Oklahoma. I think you just can't write off Hot Rod Blankenship and what he's meant to this team. Not just – nobody's doing that, of course, because he's revered, but not just clutch kicks that were made or were not made, not just the distance. I think the kickoff is also something to think about there. And the young man coming in now, who I don't think is actually allotted a scholarship in the 2020 recruiting class, is Jared Zirkle. And I would think the chances of Jared Zirkle handling the kickoffs are about as well as Brandon doing a show and saying, I've kept you too long. But I would say Zirkle will handle that. It's just what happens if Alabama, Georgia is 17-16 with a minute and a half left, and one of those dudes, let's say JT or Jamie Daniels, brings Georgia down the field and they've got a 37-yarder to win the game. I wonder how many people are reaching for the Pepto, or I wonder how many of those KG beat writers like Mike Griffith are going, all right, now let's see what this kid's all about right here. I think that's the biggest question, because Georgia defensively is going to be a very strong team. We know we're going to hold teams down, but what about those early season, everybody meshing on the same page, run game maybe stalled, pass game maybe not there? What about those games where Georgia has to make 3 or 4 kicks to win a football game? Right now, that's in the hands of a true freshman.
So 2 quick things here. First of all, that's not the position I thought you were going to bring up. Second of all, if Georgia's in a position where they need to kick 3 or 4 field goals to win a game, then it deserves to lose because field goals are failure. That's my thought on that. Connor, you had something you wanted to say.
BA just perfectly took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to go kicking field goals is for losers.
Right.
Because that's kind of what tends to end up happening. Georgia needs touchdowns this year. And yes, Rodrigo Blankenship did great things for this program. He's a great representative of the University of Georgia. That said, I think him being as good as he was as a field goal kicker, again, Lou Groza Award winner last year, I think actually is a little bit was at times harmful for the Georgia football team, in the sense that it just made things so easy for Kirby Smart to just say, yeah, let's just throw them out there and get those 3 points. When reality is, in a lot of these big games, you need touchdowns to win games. You need to score. You need to get touchdowns in the red zone. You need, anytime you get in the 40, which I believe is the scoring zone or whatever the analytics people call it.
Sure.
You need to get touchdowns. And this Georgia offense this year, with an offense that struggled as much as it did last year, yes, you can say points are at a premium, but with games against Alabama, who's going to be a top 5 team, a Florida team that'll at some point this year probably be a top 5 team, against an Auburn team that BA always really likes for some reason, against a Tennessee team that the national media is going to be in love with when they somehow find a way to beat either Oklahoma or Florida. Those games, they're going to be tough games, tough opponents, and they're not going to be won by kicking field goals. They're going to be won by the team that scores the most touchdowns. And when it comes to the kicker, yes, it's an important position, and I certainly get Jeff's point. But at the end of the day, I believe that Georgia needs to worry less about kicking field goals or who that field goal kicker is going to be, and more about finding ways to get the most possible points out of this offense.
Totally agree with Connor on this one, Mike. I'll let you get a quick thought. My thought is that Georgia, there's a very good chance in the absence of Rodrigo Blankenship, they may have a bad kicker this year, with all due respect to the guys competing. There's no guarantee that the person that earns that job is going to be a Groza-level player. My thought is go win anyway. I don't care. Have a bad kicker. Alabama won the national championship in 2017 with a bad kicker. Go win anyway. I don't care who your kicker is.
Well, this kid was raised to be a Bulldog. His mom graduated from the University of Georgia, and he's got a big leg. Made a 59-yarder last season, and in practice, he's boomed up to 65-yard field goals. So he's got the leg for it. I think he's got the pedigree. He's got a reputation as being one of the strongest legs ever. And he doesn't have the ghost haunting them that Rodrigo seemed to have this year after missing that pivotal third-quarter field goal in the SEC championship game that would have made it more than a 2-score game, or the 2 misses against South Carolina that may have been Rodrigo's mind when he missed a field goal in the SEC championship when Georgia was trying to hang on for dear life. There is a benefit to young kickers. They start out on fire. I remember selecting Rodrigo Blankenship for the freshman All-American team. 2016, 2017. And Chip Towers telling me, this kid doesn't even have a scholarship. His dad's really having it out with Kirby over getting the scholarship. So
I like how Mike goes into a Chip Towers impersonation every time he mentions him.
I can't help but talk like Chip.
At least as much as a Michigander can do.
Well, I guess, but the fact that they've given this guy a scholarship, Chip loves it too. I bet he does a good Mike. The fact that Kirby's given this kid a scholarship makes me feel good, and just so Connor feels better, they'll be working on scoring and field goals this year, Connor. It's not one or the other. They'll still be trying to punch it in from the one and also kick field goals. You can do both, and you can change it up depending on the game situation.
National champions don't settle for field goals. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. So I know you guys all had snatty, bold takes about really sharp razor edge takes about give me touchdowns. You were Paul Bunyan-esque with your quotes. But here's the thing. I'm not talking about 5 field goals a game or 20 field goals in a season. I'm talking about a game-winning field goal. The second thing to think about there is what other position on the Georgia team can you not say, well, if the intended guy doesn't get it, the second guy is pretty good. And that's a good option there for Georgia. When you look across the board, I think kicker is one of the few remaining spots where you go, yeah. And that's really not an indictment on the kicker spot, but to the rest of the position groups on the entire team in general. There's a lot of guys, but I think I said this on your show over the last summer, over the last few months. I think Georgia has the roster that's built to win a national championship. You look all the way across it, they have national championship pieces at every position, especially wide receiver, especially quarterback. The one area that I think could be one of those areas you got to wonder about and talk about right now during talking season is who's going to replace the program's all-time leading scorer.
Here's all I'll say, and I'll throw this out there and let y'all respond, then we'll move on to the topic that I thought we were going to address. Y'all seem to think that Jared Zirkle is the heir apparent here. Boy, I don't know. I got a pretty decent hedge on Jake Camarda becoming the place kicker for this team right now. To the extent that I have any opinion on this, this is not to any way downplay what Zirkle has a chance to be. I think it's tough to step off a high school field and into the SEC as a kicker. If I'm betting right now, I might put a little bit of a lean on Camarda actually emerging as this team's place kicker.
When's the last time, Mike, you can remember one SEC program had the same punter and kicker?
It's been a while, but I remember Camarda dropping a punt against Notre Dame last year at snap. I just don't think that's him. I don't see it. I don't see that being his.
Because he once dropped a punt, he can't be a field goal kicker.
Well, Camarda got a lot better after that game.
Yeah, well, he couldn't have gotten any worse. He was awful against Notre Dame.
Mike.
What are we doing?
Come on.
He darn near cost him the game against Notre Dame with the poor punt in the fourth quarter. I just think you let Jake Camarda be Jake Camarda. He's a potential NFL punter. It's a lot on your leg to kick off. I'll tell you, I have seen guys injure their legs from trying to do too much, and I think that would just be too much for Camarda or most any other punter, quite frankly.
Connor, you got a final thought on this quickly?
I'm going to pass.
Jeff, what I thought we were going to get into a minute ago is running backs. That's the position that we were going to mention where you feel like it's an unknown starter, but maybe I guess kicker worked there as well. Give me your thought on the running back position.
Well, so, this is kind of where I was going with that when we were germinating is I was like, to me, and this kind of ties in everything we've been talking about so far. To me, the number 1 and number 2 receivers will work themselves out. To me, who's the starting quarterback will work itself out. That guy will be a heck of a football player and the best man for Georgia. I think the one or two positions on the team where this guy better be the starter or something's going to be wrong with Georgia this year, because I think Zamir White's got to be the guy at running back. Because if Zamir White is not the guy at running back, wow, then all of a sudden, is this a true freshman in Kendall Melton? Is it Kenny McIntosh? Is it James Cook? All of a sudden, Georgia's depth at the running back position, of all things, guys, their depth at running back is the one spot on the team which might not be championship pedigree. I think Zamir should and will win the job, but he's the one guy where all this competition in camp and all the battle and the things that make Georgia great, the crucible of competition, if somebody beats out Jordan Davis at nose tackle, if it's Jermaine Johnson and not Nolan Smith with Aziz Ojulari at outside linebacker, fine, that means Jermaine played his Nikes off. Same thing with Tyson Campbell or DJ Daniel versus Eric Stokes at cornerback. If that guy ends up being the guy and leapfrogging the expected incumbent or intended, those are all good things, but good things for Georgia. But if Zamir is not Zeus or close to Zeus this year and Georgia's having to look at, let's face it, talented but untested Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Melton, who I think is going to be a load to bring down in the SEC, I think Georgia's absolute best football for football team for 2020, I think it has to have Zamir White chasing 1,000 yards this season.
Connor, I'd agree with Jeff on this for a quick reason. You're going to have to break in a new back in some form or fashion for one of your spots there. Georgia's traditionally been kind of a two-back team. Last year, not so much. But the idea that you'd have to bring in two guys, let's say Zamir either injured or just ineffective, whatever else, if you're trying to get more out of Kenny McIntosh, acclimate Kendall Melton to the program, that's asking a lot from guys that haven't really played a ton as of yet. I think the challenge for Georgia in terms of establishing a competent running game is made more difficult, far more difficult, if Zamir White doesn't prove to be the given that many people hopefully expect him to be.
Yeah, to your point, Georgia needs at least one guy to, and obviously they're going to have multiple running backs sort of carry the ball and play roles in this offense this year, but they need a guy to be the quote-unquote bell cow, the lead running back. And I think right now, Zamir is the guy best positioned to do that. He, again, obviously 2 ACL injuries and he's not the same player, but there were flashes of last year of you seeing him be a sort of dynamic runner, a guy who can continuously move the pile. And if he gets to the outside and can hit top speed, he might be able to break away from a defense. And we didn't see a whole lot of that from DeAndre Swift last year, I think, because of the larger issues with the Georgia offense. But if some of those get fixed, you might see White break off some long runs. And I know it might be a little sacrilegious here to make this comparison, but Zamir actually, in his running style and the way he sort of plays, does remind me a little bit of Nick Chubb in the fact that, he might not laterally juke you out of your shoes or hit you with a devastating spin move, but he's just going to keep plowing and keep running. And if you don't fully commit to bringing him down, he's just going to run on past you. I know we've seen on Twitter in recent weeks a couple of old Nick Chubb highlight reels, and so many of them are him just running into a guy and bouncing off of him. And I think Zamir White has some of that same ability, and it'll be interesting to see sort of what he looks like this year with a sort of bigger workload that I think certainly at the beginning of the season we all think he's going to get.
Mike, what's your thought on the running backs?
Yeah, I think Zamir starts out with a job. He kind of got the job for the Sugar Bowl. I thought he performed well. I didn't think he did great. It was 18 carries, 91 yards. I thought he looked okay, but I didn't think he looked DeAndre Swift, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel good in the Sugar Bowl. Now, that was the first game that he had a number of carries to work with. So let's give him a chance to get into a rhythm and get a feel for his offensive line and for the offense. I do think that this will be a running back by committee situation. I think there's going to be a lot of platooning going on. I think you're going to see Dejon Edwards and James Cook work outside a little bit and maybe become more pass receivers. I think Kenny McIntosh is a guy that can maybe do both things. Not real sure about Kendall Melton coming from Fresno High School football. He's going to get hit by some SEC guys soon. We're going to find out a lot about him in fall camp. But the only hesitation that I would have before naming anyone a bell cow is Kirby keeps talking about explosive plays. And Zamir White's longest run last year was 29 yards. And I'm not sure what Kendall Melton's top speed is. So I'll be interested to see how they do it. But in my mind, I see a first down, second down back, and then I see third down backs coming in and things getting spread out. Now, I could be completely wrong, and I know Jeff has challenged me and said Zamir can catch the ball as well as anybody. Well, that's one where the KG beat writer says I got to see it to believe it, because that was an issue last year for him.
Let me go around the horn here for a second. Last year, Kirby Smart used a second running back, arguably Zamir White, less than he'd ever used a second running back at any time in his career at Georgia. Jeff, why was that, in your opinion?
Second running back. Well, number one, the only second running backs you have to think about here are Sony, Nick. Let's not even talk about that. Then you go Elijah Holyfield and
1,000-yard rush in 2018. They used Holyfield plenty in 2018.
Yeah, but I'm going to stand on the mountain that I think the best of Zamir White's going to be better than what you saw from Holyfield in that 2018
But my
season.
question is, so just why don't you think there's a number of potential answers. I'm just curious, without poisoning the well here, what yours is. Why don't you think they played Zamir more last year?
Well, I think it's had a lot to do with Brian Herrien. I mean, Brian, you make the point about, there's some doubt about how well Zamir White can catch the football. And we all know how well Brian Herrien can catch the football. He had that trust equity in the coaching staff. Reminder, there are at least 2 or 3 games in Brian Herrien's career heading into last year where he kind of iced the game in terms of game winning, game deciding, game churning out the win carries. I mean, Herrien's going to go down as one of, the more underrated guys in that backfield. When you look at last year's Georgia backfield, which going to have a lot of future NFL pros in there. I think last year, the number 2 running back in my mind was always Brian Herrien. Zamir was the third. I think Zamir started out great against Vanderbilt and he started showing a lot of flashes. I think that 29-yard carry you saw last year from Zamir White was actually in that Vanderbilt game where the ball got kind of popped out at the very end of it. You know, I think he lost a little confidence. He lost a little of that spark he started this season with. And I don't know if he ever really got it back until maybe he got the Baylor game to work with right there. I would also say the way last year's team was built, it was designed for pass sets to protect the quarterback in the pocket and let Jake Fromm pick apart people. I don't think the offensive linemen were firing off the ball and getting those downfield blocks, except for Andrew Thomas, that we'd seen in years past. And I would even think, we bring up that term, Mike. I love that stat, but I think DeAndre Swift's longest run last year was probably only 35, 40 yards as well.
Yeah, part of me agrees with Jeff on this. The reason we didn't see more of White a year ago is there just wasn't much offense, period. Swift had an okay season, but he really wasn't as good in 2019 as he had been in 2018. That might part of the reason we didn't see more of Zamir a year ago is this offense just wasn't moving the ball well enough to get multiple running backs involved. It's just, this offense just left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, I was disappointed with the perimeter blocking, and I know that everybody gets kind of bored and goes to sleep when you start talking about how well receivers can block. But I thought the receivers last year weren't coached very well. I didn't think they blocked very well. I didn't think they were as physical as they were the year before with guys like Riley Ridley and Jason Stanley and Terry Godwin. I thought those guys really got the job done on the perimeter. And last year I felt like they got thrown around like rag dolls. I know they had 6 receivers injured last year. There wasn't a lot of continuity, and it didn't look like they were getting it done. And to your point about long runs, I mean, I don't think one run means much, but Kenny McIntosh did have a 62-yarder in the same offense that Zamir had.
Against the backup of Arkansas State.
Zamir played against a lot of backups too and had a lot more carries.
Right, but Georgia's not playing against Arkansas State backups every week. So to have one in that game and tout that as the reason that Kenny McIntosh is more than Zamir White.
I never said that.
Okay.
I just pointed out that if we're going to talk about explosive plays, this guy had a 62-yarder on 25 carries all year, and Zamir White had several carries against backup teams and only broke a 29-yarder. Whether it was his confidence or not, Connor, I don't know. Jeff said that the fumble against Vanderbilt hurt his confidence. I would think that wouldn't be an issue going into this year. He secured the ball against Baylor, and I thought had a pretty good game. But if we're talking about explosive backs, which I think will be a factor, I think that's something that you've got to consider when you pick out who you put on the field.
We'll talk about Georgia defense in a moment. Let me finish this topic by bringing up one more thing on this. I had this stat earlier this week on Dog Nation Daily. If you look at the last 8 seasons of a running back going over 1,000 yards for Georgia, in 4 of those instances, it was a guy who had a 1,000-yard season prior to that in his UGA career. And in 4 of those, it was a guy who did that for the very first time. What that lets you know is there is room for a guy to break out and have his big year for the first time here in 2020, whether it be Zamir White, who has been on the field, or a newcomer like Kendall Melton. The opportunity exists to step in and thrive after having not done that before, although admittedly there are some guys who've used experience to their advantage at UGA there in the past. Let me move on in the time we have left, talk about our defensive situation here at UGA as part of our Cover 4 Live with myself, Brandon Adams, Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sindell. Of course, you can read all of them every day at dognation.com. You can watch, listen, me as part of Dog Nation Daily each and every morning live at 10 a.m. and then podcast on demand after that. Georgia defense, if you read every single one of the preseason magazines or the prognostication stuff from people online or streaming video like we're doing right now, there's always this statement attached to Georgia and in the defense in particular. This has a chance to be one of the very best defenses in the country. But Connor, if we move past the sort of qualifications, has a chance to be one of the. What does it take for Georgia's defense to truly be the nation's best?
So the reason it was so good last year was because if you wanted to score on Georgia's defense, you had to drive the length of the field. And the reality is most college offenses can't do that on a consistent basis, especially given the talent and equity at the top levels of the sport. I think for Georgia's defense to sort of take that next step, that final step, if you will, if they need to get more sacks, they need to force more negative plays, which leads to more 3-and-outs, better field position thus for offenses, and thus generating more points. Because I think, as great as it is to sort of, limit what the other team's offense can do, if Georgia's defense, I think, is better setting up Georgia's offense for success this year, which I don't necessarily think it did all the time a season ago, I think that's going to be a big differentiator in between what makes this a very good defense and to your point, is the best defense in the country.
Jeff, what do you think about that?
So here's what I think. I hear Mike say this a lot, and maybe some of the other beat writers have as well. The difference in Kirby Smart is he actually tells you what's going on. He's not going to try to hide warts or hide inefficiencies or flaws. I remember last year, what was the buzzword for Georgia's defense? They always kept saying havoc. We need more havoc. We need to affect the offense more. We need to change the game more. That means more turnovers, more sacks, more negative plays. Wonder why he was doing that. Probably because he didn't think he had the roster for that. They weren't showing him that in spring drills. They weren't showing him that in fall camp. That's what they needed to do to take from the practice field to the game field and actually figure out, hey, is it our guys on offense that are keeping us from creating all this havoc? Or is it we have a problem creating havoc with the personnel we have right now? That was year one Azeez Ojulari, year one Jermaine Johnson, year one Nolan Smith, year one Nakobe Dean. A lot of their so-called havoc players, the guys off the edge that can really give the offense and coordinators fits, those guys were all in their first year of a very complicated Kirby Smart defense. I think that was something that Kirby's telling you exactly what the team needs to work on, hides it in plain sight with a cool little ratio like havoc rate. I think Georgia needs to create more havoc. I think that sack rate needs to go up. I think they need to live with losing that bend by don't break philosophy, and they need to put some pressure on the quarterback where, hey, maybe that's a risky move, but maybe they'll have the offense to score where every touchdown they give up to a defense is not magnified like the game against South Carolina. I think in the end, when they keep doing that, they'll force that opponent into a lot more turnovers, and the turnover inequity and the havoc will look greater in the long run.
Let me follow up on that with you, Jeff, because I think your explanation of that's kind of interesting. Certainly, if you want to go back to spring practice, they were talking havoc rate every single day. Really, by my count, by the time you got to about mid-October, in terms of press conferences and things like that, they stopped talking about havoc rate at all. And that's true for either one of two reasons. They realized the offense just simply was incapable of scoring enough points to be as aggressive as they originally wanted to be on defense. They were essentially playing the football version of the infield in, knowing that every point was going to matter in terms of how a game was won or lost, or they were having a hard time designing the tackles for loss and the sacks they wanted to go out and get. For me, it's probably a lot more likely the first part of that than the last part of that once they realized they weren't scoring enough points to win games, they knew they had to be a lot more conservative defensively. What do you think?
I guess that was a rebuttal to me. I think I'd love to see what Kirby Smart's defense, what would look like. You got to go back to those Alabama games as well, that born-in bred philosophy. You know, even if a Kirby Smart had a Tua Tagovailoa offense, I think the way he's built, the way he is wired, maybe Matt Luke changes that, maybe Todd Monken changes that. But I think the way he was built would be to protect points with a very good defense and not take risks by putting the ball in the air. I think when you look at that, and it's the same thing he said about the wide receiver position. Remember him lamenting in spring practice, I can't wait till all these receivers get here. We need receivers. I want to see what that group looks like, because he knows what he has and what he doesn't have, and he kind of lets the world know in his own certain way of doing so. I just think you add in Trayvon Walker, you add in another piece here or there, you get another year of all that secondary, a lot of guys. I think Georgia's going to have the ability to not just hold back and hunker down and stall teams out. I think they can just outright snuff some teams out and take the ball away more this year.
Well, I think it's important. I think you do need to be in the backfield more. But how about the point, Mike, that Jeff just made, which is, or at least the thing I took away from what Jeff just said, the same way that sometimes we debate is Kirby Smart's tendency to be a little too conservative offensively, there's a way to be too conservative defensively as well, protecting your secondary. We've had experts before say this was a defensive back-oriented defense as opposed to a front seven-oriented defense. Has Kirby Smart done too much to protect the secondary at the risk or at the expense of not being more impactful in the backfield, not giving guys more chance to get to the quarterback? Is there a sense in which the Georgia defense needs to also be more aggressive the way that the Georgia offense has been called upon to be more aggressive?
Yeah, and Kirby and his staff have to kind of pick their spots for that. And to Connor's points, they ranked 11th in the SEC last year in turnovers forced per game. That was an area to me that always struck me. I've always been more surprised that Kirby defenses don't force more turnovers. When you look at his career, and gosh, I'm not sure, but is he still tied for the single season interception mark? I know he had 9 in 1 year, and the thought of one guy getting 9 now just blows my mind. I don't know if anybody had more than 3 or 4 last year. I think I'd like to see more out of one of those safety spots. I was disappointed J.R. Reed wasn't more of a playmaker last year. Now, I will give these guys credit, because while we're talking about, they need to get more sacks and they need to take more chances, I think one of the greatest statistics about last year's defense was that they didn't give up a play longer than 40 yards the final 6 games of the regular season. That's being assignment sound. That's having gap control. That's making sure receivers don't get behind you. And, going for the blitz and going for the big play sounds great until you become 3rd and Grantham and you give up the 3rd and 23 conversion because you blitzed and that tight end ran open across the middle because the linebacker was stunning from the outside and didn't reach the target. So I think your point's right, BA. I think if we think about the last 2 Alabama games, which nobody really wants to do, but when you think about them, it does seem like Alabama kind of wiggled off the hook with quarterback play late and certainly big plays, whether it was 2nd and 26 or Brenton Cox, the new Florida defensive end, losing contain on Jalen Hurts a few times in the 4th quarter.
For 2 years now, I've been calling for this Georgia defense to be in the backfield more, certainly sack quarterbacks more. So I'll say something different to keep from repeating myself a little too much. Instead, I'll say this in the form of a question. Mike, I want you to answer this first, and Connor and Jeff, I'd like for you to weigh in as well. Is it too much to ask Georgia, as a great defense, possibly the nation's best, can you hold a great offense to a low number? Is that too much to ask? I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being serious. Last year, nation's number 1 scoring offense, LSU, easily scored 37, could have scored more if it needed to. Go back to 2018 SEC championship game, nation's number 3 offense, Alabama, scoring offense anyway, scored 35. Obviously, 2017, nation's number 3 scoring offense, Oklahoma, had 40-something in a game that Georgia won. If this is the best defense in America, Mike, and it very well might be, but if it is, one of the ways I want to judge that is go out, play a great offense, which you'll have to do to win a national championship, hold a great offense to a low number. That, to me, is a big deal. Not holding some of the more mediocre SEC offenses you'll see to a low number, but hold a top-scoring offense to a low number. At that point in time, you can truly call yourself the nation's best defense.
Yeah, I thought they looked good holding Auburn scoreless for 3 quarters, especially when you looked at Auburn.
That's not a great scoring offense, though. Like
don't tell Alabama that, because they almost put 50 on Alabama 2 weeks later.
2 defensive touchdowns in that game.
Okay, well then 37, Connor. They scored a lot of points against Alabama, and Georgia shut them out for 3 quarters. I was impressed. I thought Baylor had a pretty good offense, and they were shut out for a half too. And they only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns. There was a lot about the defense to like, but I think it all goes together. I think it has to do with how well you control the football on offense, if you're running the ball effectively and taking time off the clock. I think it also has to do with the turnover game, and that was an area where Georgia really struggled. I think one of the points Connor made early was they didn't really help their offense out consistently, certainly not against LSU. So to beat those kind of teams and to contain those kind of offenses, you've got to keep them off the field, and you've got to force turnovers.
Any other final
Brandon,
thoughts?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Brandon, can I jump in?
Please.
So I'm sitting here listening to this, and I'm gonna hold this point, 2 or 3 points to be self-evident. One,
please.
Georgia's ultimate measuring stick for its program, what it is, what it was, what it will be, is going to be Alabama. So let's look at the Alabama games. In the 2017 game, that was the one where they faced each other in 2017 season, 2018 January. What was the thinking there? It was Georgia had a very good front 7. They had a not so talented back end, but an experienced back end. I'm talking about Dominic Sanders, Aaron Davis, Malcolm Parrish, guys like that. They were veterans, and yet they weren't as talented as the guys that they were going to bring in. Let's look to the second time they played Alabama. The second time they played Alabama, the guys were not as talented on the back end, but they were a lot more they didn't have the experience that the year before did. Conversely, Georgia's front 7, it didn't have a Roquan Smith. It lost Davin Bellamy. So those edge guys, those up front guys, weren't the same as the team that faced Alabama earlier that year in the national championship game. Now you've reached a point where the Georgia defense, where folks, they can't get any more talented in the backfield than they're going to be this year. They can't get any more experienced in the backfield outside of Lewis Seen than they can be on the back line. Now it's just a mixture of, can Georgia check all the boxes with dudes, stellar NFL first-round prospects, but not also green around the gills type guys? Because when you're thinking defensively and you're thinking about Georgia holding guys back, I think this year's defense should eliminate any reason going in. You can't say, oh, well, Lewis Seen isn't as a veteran as J.R. Reed. If you want to, that's going to be picking a very small nit, because Lewis Seen athletically, physically is going to have a lot more size, hitting ability as J.R. Reed did. I'm not asking Lewis Seen to be J.R. Reed after 45, 50 games in the SEC. I'm asking Lewis Seen to play like J.R. Reed did in 2017, and I think he can do that. And you look all across this game, all across the field for Georgia, you're going to have Aziz year 2, Trayvon Walker year 2, Jordan Davis year 3, Nolan, Jermaine, N'Kobe, Monty Rice, Eric, Tyson, DJ Daniel, Mark Webb, Devad Wilson, Tyreek Stevenson, maybe a Jalen Carter. I mean, literally, you roll through the list, and you can't say, "Oh yeah, but Georgia didn't have this. Oh yeah, Georgia didn't have that." There are no yeah buts about this defensive side of the ball for Georgia anymore.
Well, Jeff, you mentioned the Alabama game. Stay with me on this just for a minute. The time we have left. Going into Tuscaloosa and limiting Najee Harris. Georgia, when it has given up rushing yards, has a tendency – I shouldn't say a tendency to lose because this doesn't happen very much. But when Georgia has lost, a big running performance from the opponent has typically played into that. Obviously, the 2 Alabama losses in the Smart era were both instances which Alabama outrushed Georgia. So you want to see a great defense on display. Go into Tuscaloosa. Najee Harris been patted on the back for returning back to Tuscaloosa this upcoming season. Limit him that night. Give yourself a chance to outrush them. You've given yourself a huge chance to win that game. That's a big early test to find out just how good this Georgia defense, with all that talent you just mentioned, how good it is. Go out and limit the Alabama rushing attack in September.
I tell you one thing: if they hold Alabama without a rushing touchdown, and they make Mac Jones or Bryce Young, who basically knows how to get around class in Tuscaloosa right now, considering he had online classes in the spring. If you make Alabama throw the ball to beat Georgia, throw the ball alone to beat Georgia, throwing into that experienced secondary, all of a sudden Georgia's chances of that win go up on the road in Tuscaloosa.
All right, the time we have left, I promised a Facebook comment earlier. We would mention the unknown around the Georgia offensive line. Mike, I'm going to give you a chance to do this. Connor, I'll give you a chance to respond. Handicap where you think things stand at the offensive line spot right now for Georgia, Mike. The starters that you're sure about, and obviously a little bit of debate on what's going to happen in those tackle spots.
Yeah, I guess Trey Hill and Justin Schaefer are the 2 guys, the center and the left guard, that I feel. Jeff brought up a good point. I suppose Trey could get moved out of there if someone beats him out, or if they're better. It's all about getting the best 5 out there. And I feel like there's 4 guys I feel pretty good about, with Jamari Salyer, still my favorite to win the left tackle job, Justin Schaefer at left guard, Trey Hill at center, Ben Cleveland at right guard, and then I suppose Erickson perhaps. He played good in the Sugar, but the right tackle spot is the one to me, or maybe both tackles. Is anybody good enough to beat out Jamari and keep Jamari at right tackle? I think doubtful at the start of the year. So the right tackle spot to me, guys, is the one that is a big question mark, and I know we've talked about that before on Cover 4s. We heard Solomon Kinley suggest that Notori Johnson could be moving back over to offense to play tackle. I haven't confirmed that yet, but that wouldn't surprise me. Could it be Xavier Truss? I know he was quite the signee, albeit not from the greatest high school football area in the country in the Northeast at Rhode Island. But the right tackle spot, BA, is kind of my question mark.
Connor, what do you think?
I would go Jamari Sawyer at left tackle, Justin Schaefer at left guard, Trey Hill at center, Ben Cleveland at right guard, and Warren McClendon at right tackle to start the year. Over the course of the season, I think it will be interesting to watch and follow along with the development of Broderick Jones. I think Jeff and I can both attest to he is, from a potential standpoint, one of the great offensive line recruits that Georgia has gotten in recent seasons. And it comes down to, how quickly can he sculpt his body and add on weight to sort of handle the physical rigors of playing college football, and how quickly can he adjust to the speed of the game into where maybe Georgia, feels comfortable enough to where they can put him out there at left tackle, which I think his long-term position is, and then move Jamari Salyer to that right tackle spot where he played very well in the Sugar Bowl. And I think over the course of the season, that is going to be the thing that I really watch for in the offensive line. And if Georgia does make any sort of tweaks or changes there.
Jeff, we're going to wrap up right after this. I would agree with 4 of the names that Connor mentioned. The right tackle, if I were to mention a Truss or a McClendon or a Broderick Jones, it really is just a guess for me at this point in time. So here's what I'm going to say in terms of a more educated guess. Speaking as a fan for a moment, if you can give me the season from Salyer that I think I'm going to get, I really trust Justin Schaefer. I think he was actually maybe better than people realize. He just wasn't playing very much a year ago prior to his injury, but I think that Georgia trusted him enough to put him just underneath that sort of Cade Mays, Jamari Salyer level of sort of super stud status, which is not an easy place to earn on the Georgia roster. I think Hill is fine. I think the Ben Cleveland is fine. If you can give me those 4 guys in the solid roles that I expect them to fill for Georgia, I'm okay with a little bit of an unknown at right tackle. You're not always going to have Isaiah Wilson as your right tackle opposite Andrew Thomas. It's not going to be a dream team offensive line every single season. So if it's growing pains for a freshman like Jones, or if it's learning on the job for a McClendon or a Truss or somebody like that, if I got 4 guys that are really getting it done, I think 4 can help the 1 on the right tackle side. I'm a little bit okay not knowing who my right tackle is if I'm Georgia, as long as I can get the not even top end performance, just the middle level expected performance from the other 4 guys I just mentioned. I can deal with a little bit of uncertainty at right tackle. What do you think?
Well, here's what I'm worried about. Let me just everybody loves lists and rankings and numbers here. I can only think of 2 offensive linemen that I would say that Georgia has signed that came in that were clearly better than Broderick Jones. I'm going to say Andrew Thomas, and I'm going to say Jamari Salyer. I would probably put Cedric Von Granger pretty close to where Jones is among the top 5 that Sam Pittman and Matt Luke had ever signed. I actually feel good about Broderick Jones. I got some reports back. Everybody saw some of the social media, how he was working out with Jamari Salyer. I was told that Broderick looked very impressive in those workouts. He'd actually put on some weight. It would not surprise me by the time he gets to August. Mike, help me with it. August 8th, August 7th. What's the number?
For Georgia, of course, because they opened the season on September 7th instead of September 5th. September 7th is the opener.
No, first practice. When's their first practice? August 7th or August 8th?
August 9th for Georgia.
I'm going to tell you right now, I fully believe Broderick Jones will be over 305 pounds, maybe close to 310 pounds by that time. He has uncanny athleticism. Again, we're not asking Broderick Jones to be Andrew Thomas. We're not asking Broderick Jones to be Walter Jones or Penei Sewell at Oregon. You're probably going to ask Broderick Jones to be as good as Isaiah Wilson was in his redshirt season at Georgia at right tackle. I think Broderick is capable of doing that, especially at the right tackle spot. I think the greater imagery for concern to me is that entire right side, because you have a question mark at right tackle, and then folks feel good about Ben Cleveland, maybe great about Ben Cleveland, but they wonder, is Ben Cleveland going to be that guy that's going to go wall to wall? Certainly cuts an imposing figure, certainly is a guy you want with you in a dark alley, but what about not just firing off the ball, but also pass protecting as well? I start wondering about, does Xavier Truss, does the Warren McClendons, did those guys become part of the wonder, or part of the experiment competition there at right guard as well? I think Georgia's going to try and turn some tackles into guards because they want to get their best 5 out there. And I keep saying this all the time. I would not be stunned at all if you find a way to get your top 5 guys across the line. And that may include moving Trey Hill to right guard. Maybe Cedric Von Granger becomes your center. And then all of a sudden, the stability feels a little bit better. The starts, the guys that have been in the SEC wars feels a little bit better, where you don't have, I'm not going to say 2 question marks on the right side of the line, but you definitely don't have 2 exclamation points on the right side of the line. I think that's something for Georgia and Matt Luke to really focus in on during the preseason.
A lot to watch for with the Georgia offensive line. We'll have to leave it there for now as we get ready to say goodbye on Discover 4 Live. Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel. Any final thoughts from any of you?
Yeah, so going back to, talking about the defense, just one point I want to make. You look at recent college football, national title games, college football playoff games, and Bud Elliott made your point on the show a couple of weeks ago, BA. The reality is great defenses don't do what they used to and really even, slow down great offenses. You look at LSU last year, and granted, that's a historically great offense. They had their way with Clemson, and Clemson was, in my opinion, one of the 5 best defenses from last year. You look at, the Alabama defense from 2 years ago. Clemson's offense just had their way with them. I think in today's game, with the way that college football is set up, with the way offenses are constantly innovating and adding, and defenses always sort of playing catch up, the reality is, at the end of the day, if you want to be a championship team, which Georgia does, as great as your defense can potentially be, and I do think Georgia's can be the best in the country, championships are won and lost at the college level with how great your offenses are.
Mike or Jeff, thought before we go? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. And, we really don't know how much this lost preparation is going to affect offenses. You always say offenses have to catch up to defense. I think it's to Georgia's advantage to play Alabama the 3rd week of the season. September 19th in Tuscaloosa, as opposed to October and November, when maybe teams can kind of grease the skids and get their timing and their choreography down. I do think defenses this particular year, because of the lack of preparation time, I think this could have a little bit different effect. I think Connor's right, though. The rules are clearly skewed in the favor of the offense. You do have to score points come the end of the year. We've seen it a couple of times where Georgia's had commanding leads over Alabama. And, some people have said maybe took their foot off the gas a little too soon. So I think Kirby generally does a pretty good job moderating the accelerator. Florida's a good example. They only had 3 points going into the fourth quarter and 175 total yards against Georgia last year. So I do think they'll play in Alabama early in the season will be to Georgia's benefit because I think defenses this particular year. And then the other factor, BA, COVID-19, who's going to be in and out of the lineup?
Yeah.
This is going to be the most unpredictable season that we've seen in decades.
For the good or for the bad, unfortunately, that may be true. Jeff, anything to say before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I got two things. One is a stat. Folks, raise your hand if you know the names of the two players on Georgia's offense that return with more than 10 starts in their career. Can you name me the two guys?
I got one right off the top of my head.
Ray Hill.
Hill.
Richard LeCount.
What are you saying offense?
On sorry, Ben Cleveland.
Correct. There are actually three guys on offense that have more than 10 career starts. Demetrius Robertson at 17 is the team leader. A lot of people wouldn't probably have went with that bet. Trey Hill also has 17. That was through the LSU game as well. Kearis Jackson already has 10. A lot of people would have came up with those three names in terms of starters and savvy and those experienced players Kirby Smart likes to put on the field. And the one more point I'll leave you guys is this morsel. Richard LeCount led the team in fumbles caused last year. He led the team in fumbles recovered last year, and he led the team in interceptions last year. When you think about Richard LeCount, and he's had 27 starts as a Georgia Bulldog, he is the one guy in my mind that epitomizes havoc, and he's the one guy that you think, if you're Claude Felton and that world-class PR SID staff at the University of Georgia, you had to put one name up for preseason, postseason honors heading out the door. Start of the 2020 season, I think Richard LeCount might be the best name for Georgia.
Certainly no shortage of that on the preseason newsstands thus far. Good stuff from Jeff Sintel, Mike Griffith, Connor Riley. We'll say goodbye to all of you now as part of our Cover 4 Live. See you again very soon here on the Dog Nation video channels. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., I'll have Dog Nation Daily presented by Kroger. Look forward to having Jeff Sintel on that show. A lot of UGA recruiting news. And, of course, Mike Griffith, Connor Riley, plenty coming from them on the pages of dognation.com as well. Big thanks to Michael Carvel, our producer, for keeping this train on the tracks the entire time. Y'all have a great afternoon, everybody. We'll look forward to talking to you back here again very soon.